One of the most perplexing mysteries in all of A Song of Ice and Fire is what happened to Benjen Stark. In this video, I'm going to show you that Benjen is living out his second life inside Jon's Direwolf, Ghost. If you haven't watched my last video, Wargapalooza, then you might want to do that, as it'll give you some background on it. But one thing to keep in mind is that when someone joins with a Direwolf, it changes both the Direwolf and the Warg. Let's take a look at the evidence for Benjen and Ghost having become one. We are introduced to Benjen when he attends the feast for King Robert at Winterfell. He comes across a drunken Jon, and Benjen doesn't seem shocked or even bothered by the presence of Ghost. "Is that one of the direwolves I've heard so much of?" a familiar voice asked, close at hand. Jon looked up happily as his Uncle Ben put a hand on his head and ruffled his hair, much as Jon had ruffled the wolf's. "Yes," he said, "his name is Ghost." Benjen then tries to talk Jon out of joining the Watch until he's lived a little, but Jon is having none of it and becomes a recruit. So early on we see Benjen looking out for Jon, trying to help him in his life decision, and not to be too hasty and do something he might regret later on. Later, while in training, Jon learns that Benjen is to lead a ranging beyond the wall into the haunted forest. His uncle denies him the chance to go as he's still a recruit, and he tells Jon that at the wall a man gets what he earns. In short, Jon's not going to get an easy go of it just for being a blood relation to... So again, he's established early on as someone who cares about Jon and wants him to do things the right way. Now, these same principles are shown in the actions of Ghost, who repeatedly looks out for Jon and actively helps prevent him from making mistakes he would later regret. But it isn't until after Jon to see his uncle off that Ghost starts in with his Benjen-like behavior. Keep in mind, up to this point, Ghost has been acting or reacting according to Jon's emotional state, much in the same way the other direwolves do with the other Starks. Two instances that show this in Game of Thrones involve Tyrion. First is when he and Jon are on the road from Winterfell to the Wall. Tyrion pokes fun at Jon to the point of upsetting him, and the following occurs. "Stop it!" the boy screamed. He took a step forward, his hands coiling into fists, close to tears. Suddenly, absurdly, Tyrion felt guilty. He took a step forward, intending to give the boy a reassuring pat on the shoulder or mutter some word of apology. He never saw the wolf, where it was or how it came at him. One moment he was walking towards snow, and the next he was flat on his back on the hard, rocky ground, the book spinning away from him as he fell, the breath going out of him at the sudden impact, his mouth full of dirt and blood and rotting leaves. Now the second instance, where we can see the wolves acting on the state of the Warg, is when Tyrion stops back in at Winterfell on the return trip to King's Landing. Robb greets Tyrion hostilely and makes it clear that guest right will not be extended to him. The door to the yard flew open. Sunlight came streaming across the hall as Rickon burst in breathless. The direwolves were with him. The boys stopped by the door, wide-eyed, but the wolves came on. Their eyes found Lannister, or perhaps they caught his scent. Summer began to growl first. Greywind picked it up. They padded toward the little man, one from the right, one from the left. "The wolves do not like your smell, Lannister," Theon Greyjoy commented. "Perhaps it's time I took my leave," Tyrion said. He took a step backward, and Shaggydog came out of the shadows behind him, snarling. Lannister recoiled, and Summer lunged at him from the other side. He reeled away, unsteady on his feet, and Greywind snapped at him, teeth ripping his sleeve and tearing loose a scrap of cloth. "No!" Bran shouted from the high seat as the Lannisters' men reached for their steel. "Summer, to me!" The direwolf heard the voice, glanced at Bran and again at Lannister. He crept backward away from the little man and settled down below Bran's dangling feet. Robb had been holding his breath. He let it out with a sigh and called, "Greywind." His direwolf moved to him, swift and silent. Now there was only Shaggydog, rumbling at the small man, his eyes burning like green fire. "Rickon, call him!" Bran shouted to his baby brother, and Rickon remembered himself and screamed, "Home, Shaggy! Home now!" The black wolf gave Lannister one final snarl and bounded off to Rickon, who hugged him tightly around the neck. Now, it's important to keep in mind the emotional state of the Starks prior to the wolves attacking. Tyrion had just given over plans for a special saddle that would enable Bran to ride a horse. Fortunately, this is a POV chapter for Bran, and we get his emotional state. "Will I truly be able to ride?" Bran asked. He wanted to believe them, but he was afraid. Perhaps it was just another lie. So Bran feels skeptical, fearful, and untrusting. Robb is also hostile and suspicious. Keeping in mind he thinks one of the Lannisters hired the catspaw that tried to kill his younger brother, and that the Queen poisoned the former hand of the king, Jon Arryn. Robb Stark seemed puzzled. Is this some trapped Lannister? What's Bran to you? Why should you want to help him? And now the direwolves react and play off the emotional state of their human counterparts who are dealing with the social nuances and navigating the context and complexities of each situation. Let's jump ahead several chapters, to when Sam has arrived at the wall and is having trouble fitting in. He and Jon go for a walk to chat, and Samwell breaks down crying when Jon asks him why a coward is joining the Night's Watch. Samwell Tarly looked at him for a long moment, and his round face seemed to cave in on itself. He sat down on the frost-covered ground and began to cry, huge choking sobs that made his whole body shake. Jon Snow could only stand and watch. Like snowfall in the Barrowlands, it seemed the tears would never end. It was Ghost who knew what to do. Silent as a shadow, the pale dire wolf moved closer and began to lick the warm tears off Samwell Tarly's face. The fat boy cried out, startled, and somehow, in a heartbeat, his sobs turned to laughter. Ghost is showing empathy while Jon doesn't have a clue as to what he should be doing in this scene. Ghost is acting independently and not reacting to Jon's emotional state. The roles are reversed, with Ghost understanding the social context of the situation and Jon reacting to Ghost. We can find further evidence that Ghost doesn't really act like an animal at all and shows human levels of intelligence overcoming animal instinct when Jon and Sam travel beyond the wall to take the Night's Watch vows in the Weirwood Grove. Consider the following passages. The Lord Steward's Garin whickered and backed away from the direwolf. "Do you mean to take that beast?" "Yes, my lord," said Jon. Ghost's head lifted. He seemed to taste the air. In the blink of an eye he was off, racing across the broad, weed-choked field to vanish in the trees. Jon assumes Ghost is off to go hunting, but actually he's caught the scent of something else, and we see what that is at the end of the chapter. And suddenly Ghost was back, stalking softly between the two weirwoods. White fur and red eyes, Jon realized, disquieted, like the trees. The wolf had something in his jaws, something black. "What's he got there?" asked Bowen Marsh, frowning. "To me, Ghost," Jon knelt. "Bring it here." The direwolf trotted to him. Jon heard Samwell Tarly's sharp intake of breath. "Gods be good," Tywin muttered. "That's a hand!" Now Ghost has torn off the limb of Jafer Flowers, who was one of the men that was part of Benjen's party that went off ranging and never returned. In the next Jon chapter, they're investigating, and they also discover the body of Other, who also went missing. The horses and dogs used by the Watch fear the corpses and refuse to approach them. It was Ghost who ended up leading them to the bodies, as the hound dogs refused to take the scent to track. Ghost is showing human levels of intelligence and overcoming animal instinct, looking out for Jon and the Watch in general. Additionally, when the White of Other rises up, Ghost goes after it immediately. He even wakes Jon in the process, enabling him to leave his bedchamber he was in and allowing him to head directly to where Mormont is sleeping. Ghost even stops part of the way up the steps to look back at Jon. This is when Jon realizes something is up in the Lord Commander's chamber. When they get to the door, Ghost attacks and does so by leaping and taking down the White. Now this is the second time he's leapt to knock a foe to the ground. Ghost leapt. Man and wolf went down together, with neither scream nor snarl, rolling, smashing into a chair, knocking over a table laden with papers. As things go on, when the White starts to choke Jon, it starts looking bad for him, but Ghost saves him. And suddenly the corpse's weight was gone, its fingers ripped from his throat. It was all Jon could do to roll over, retching and shaking. Ghost had it again. He watched as the direwolf buried his teeth in the White's gut and began to rip and tear. He watched only half conscious for a long moment before he finally remembered to look for his sword. When Jon is about to throw oil to burn the White, he shouts and Ghost gets out of the way, again showing human levels of intelligence. In the last Jon chapter of Game of Thrones, when Jon is abandoning the Watch to go and join his brother Robb in his war efforts and help avenge the death of Eddard Stark, Sam tries to stop him, but he and Ghost leave anyway. Now Ghost follows Jon for a while and then vanishes. Ghost is gone so long that Jon becomes concerned that the direwolf and him may be separated. Jon even stops, giving his direwolf a chance to catch up. While waiting, he hears the sound of approaching riders and leads his own mount off the road into some cover. Fortunately, it's Jon's friends who came looking for him to bring him back. Jon's mare makes a noise, prompting the boys to stop and listen for a moment. It's at that exact moment when Ghost reappears and we get the following passage. The hushed silence seemed to stretch on and on. From where Jon crouched, he could see the legs of their horses through the branches. Finally, Pip spoke up. "What did you hear?" "I don't know," Haldir admitted. a sound. I thought it might have been a horse, but there's nothing here. Out of the corner of his eye, John glimpsed a pale shape moving through the trees. Leaves rustled, and Ghost came bounding out of the shadows so suddenly that John's mare startled and gave a whinny. "There!" Halder shouted. "I heard it too!" "Traitor," John told the Direwolf as he swung up into the saddle. So Ghost, who is infamously known for being quiet, rustles leaves and startles John's mount, intentionally giving away his position. He does this as he realizes it's John's friends who aren't going to bring John to justice, but are going to get John to not make a terrible mistake and help him keep his vows. No other point in the entire story does any other direwolf act against the best interests of its Warg companion. So Benjen has actively been helping John all along, not only keeping him physically safe, but also helping him keep his vows. Not convinced yet? Okay, if the ranging John goes on beyond the wall doesn't convince you, nothing will. When the Night's Watch makes camp at the Fist of the First Men, Ghost comes to John in the middle of the night, leads him away from the camp to the base of the hill, where Ghost digs up a hidden cache of weapons, bound up in a cloak of a brother of the Night's Watch. These weapons are obsidian. One of the obsidian daggers is used later on by Sam to slay one of the others. But that isn't even the most convincing thing that happens. When Corran Halfhand shows up, he already is aware that John has a direwolf companion, and he immediately names John as one of the men who will accompany him on his scouting mission. When Lord Commander Mormont asks him why, he replies, "The old gods are still strong beyond the wall. The gods of the First Men. And the Starks." In addition, he also tells John, "We ride at noon," the ranger told him. "Best find that wolf of yours." Now, as Benjen was first ranger, it's more than likely he and Corran knew one another quite well, hence why Corran knows about Ghost as well as the Starks keeping to worship of the old gods. From there, it just gets more obvious that Ghost is much more than just a direwolf. In the Skirkling Pass, John has a wolf dream and sees through the eyes of Ghost, who scouts the wildling horde for him. The information John relates back to Corran is so good that he makes his tactical decisions on the basis of it. John again assumed Ghost was out hunting again, but is mistaken. Ghost is actively assisting in the mission and aiding them with intel. Reconnaissance isn't something a normal canine would do, nor was it anything John directed Ghost to do. This is something Ghost is opting to do himself, and something that Benjen most certainly would have done as a member of the Watch. Corran seems to know that Benjen was a warg, and hints at it in the following passage. "The cold winds are rising. Mormont feared as much. Benjen Stark felt it as well. Dead men walk and the trees have eyes again. Why should we balk at wargs and giants?" Now, when they're heading back, and it's just John, Ghost, and Corran, they seek shelter inside a cave. John is ordered to yield, join the wildlings, and do whatever it takes to convince him he's betrayed the Watch, gather intel, and then report back to Mormont. Ghost is present, and he hears this conversation. He also sits silently while John and Corran recite the Night's Watch vows, almost as if he's joining them. Once they pass through the cave network, they come to the other side and encounter the wildlings led by Rattleshirt, who are waiting for them. Corran tells John to remember his orders, and John yields before the wildlings start shooting. John leaves, and Rattleshirt tells John to kill the half-hand. But before John has a chance to reply, Corran attacks John. Now the two fight, and it's Ghost again who comes to the aid of John. But keep in mind, Ghost has leapt at enemies in the past who attacked John, knocking them to the ground and then biting them. Here's the passage. Even when Ghost's teeth closed savagely around the ranger's calf, somehow Corran kept his feet. But in that instant, as he twisted, the opening was there. John planted and pivoted. The ranger was leaning away, and for an instant it seemed that John's slash had not touched him. Then a string of red tears appeared across the big man's throat, bright as a ruby necklace, and the blood gushed out of him, and Corran Halfhand fell. Ghost again shows human level of intelligence and realizes John must win the trust of the wildlings. Considering Corran was focusing on fighting John, Ghost could have easily leapt and taken him down to the ground from behind. So instead of leaping, he opts to bite his calf, enabling John to get the kill, and thus earn the wildlings' trust. Let's move ahead to A Storm of Swords. It's the night before John and the wildling party are to scale the wall. Near the abandoned castle of Greyguard, John goes looking for Ghost and finds him atop a hill looking at the stars. Now, animals don't normally pay close attention to the stars, but here's the passage. He found Ghost atop the hill as he thought he might. The white wolf never howled, yet something drew him to the heights all the same, and he would squat there on his hindquarters, hot breath rising in a white mist as his red eyes drank the stars. It might be understandable if Ghost was howling at the moon, or at least looking at it, but he isn't. He's hanging out in high places and looking at the stars. An experienced ranger would be able to navigate by the stars, assuming Planetos has the equivalent of a North Star. Being up in a high place would afford a view to assist in the navigation. You have to go to Castle Black, do you understand? Castle Black. Can you find it? The way home? Just follow the ice, east and east, into the sun, and you'll find it. They will know you at Castle Black, and maybe your coming will warn them. But let's also keep in mind that Benjen also wanted Jon to do things the right way. After the battle with the wildlings, Stannis offers to give Jon Winterfell. He will need to wed the wildling Princess Val as part of the bargain. Taking a walk to the north side of the wall to think things over, Jon contemplates being lord of the castle he grew up in, and we get the following passage. He wanted it, Jon knew then. He wanted it as much as he had ever wanted anything. I have always wanted it, he thought guiltily. May the gods forgive me. A few minutes later, Jon is feeling hungry and the urge to hunt and realizes Ghost is near. He calls out, and they are reunited. After a moment or two of being happy to see one another, Jon reflects the following. Red eyes, Jon realized, but not like Melisandre's. He had a Weirwood's eyes. Red eyes and red mouth, white fur, blood and bone, like a heart tree. He belongs to the old gods, this one, and he alone of all the direwolves was white. 6 pups they'd found in the late summer snows, him and Robb, 5 that were gray and black and brown for the 5 Starks, and 1 white as snow. He had his answer then. Again, like when he was thinking of abandoning his oath to the Night's Watch, Ghost shows up and Jon ends up deciding to keep his oath. All of this is pretty compelling, but it all relies on proving that Benjen actually is inside Ghost. Otherwise, it's all circumstantial. In my last video, Wargapalooza, I said that the ability to warg is handed down from generation to generation to those descended from the Kings of Winter. Benjen is of that line, but I also said that members of House Stark need a Direwolf in order for their abilities to manifest. So if Benjen is living his second life out in Ghost, where is his Direwolf that helped his abilities manifest? Also, when did he do this and why Ghost? Why not live out his second life in his own Direwolf? In Game of Thrones, Robb and Jon find a dead she-wolf who had birthed the direwolf pups the Stark children take. This is discovered in the Wolf's Woods, and we get the following quote from Theon. There's not been a direwolf sighted south of the wall in 200 years. 200 years is a pretty long time, and the 700-foot wall of ice that literally spans the land from sea to sea has been extremely effective in keeping out the things from the north of the wall that can't climb. So how did she get there? Pretty sure she didn't dig her way under, which leaves only one other option. It passed through. Benjen joined the Night's Watch after Ned returned from fighting in Robert's rebellion, with his heir Robb. As First Ranger, he would know of any secret passages leading from north to the south side, like the Black Gate that Bran passes through in the Night Fort. In fact, Benjen most likely used the Black Gate in the Night Fort to get his direwolf below the wall and into the southern Wolf's Wood, where it could safely birth its pups. Additionally, as First Ranger, Benjen had plenty of opportunity to travel beyond the wall, bond with the direwolf, and develop his working abilities. This also explains why Qhorin picks Jon, who has never been on a ranging before in his life, to accompany him on his task. It's not that he trusted Jon so much, as he may have suspected that Benjen was living his second life through Ghost. Benjen could never have foreseen the death of his direwolf, and when Benjen bleeds out beyond the wall, being unable to join with his own direwolf, he does the next best thing. He joins with Ghost. The death of Benjen was foreshadowed when Jon watched him leave the Castle Black on his final ranging. In Jon's mind's eye, he saw Benjen Stark lying dead, his blood red on the snow. I fully expect in the Winds of Winter we will see Jon enter into Ghost for his second life, and he will discover the essence of Benjen Stark. Much in the same way, Varamir Sixskins found the remnants of Orell in the eagle he took after Jon Snow killed him. Considering the following passage from Storm of Swords. The skin changer was grey-faced, round-shouldered, and bald, a mouse of a man with wolfling's eyes. Once a horse is broken to the saddle, any man can mount him, he said in a soft voice. Once a beast's been joined to a man, any skin changer can slip inside and ride him. Orell was withering inside of his feathers, so I took the eagle for my own. But the joining works both ways, Warg. Orell lives inside me now, whispering how much he hates you, and I can soar above the wall and see with eagle's eyes. So likely this will greatly change Jon in the upcoming books. Only time will tell if this theory proves to be correct, but all the textual evidence does seem to suggest that this is the right of it. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you have any questions or you have a theory you want me to review, feel free to comment below or send me an email at askShaggydog@gmail.com.